Today on Typical Books, it's some of the books that I have picked up recently, mostly extreme horror, and what I'm reading right now. It's not extreme horror, the book I'm reading right now. I've read a sample of We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver, and I really enjoyed it so far. So I've picked that up, and I've read a lot of stuff lately. Oh my gosh. And we're only, 20 days into it. So we'll start out talking about some of the books that I've read recently. Linghun by Ai Jiang. I just finished reading this today. I mostly read it today. I started reading this book at the first of the month, but then jumped into other things and then came back to this because I thought, since We Used to Live Here seems to be like a haunted house sort of thing, although it is kind of weird, like House of Leaves or Horror Store by Grady Hendrix, this is a more straightforward, although very different and modern ghost story and haunted house story. It's a haunted town story, so if you liked Haunting of Velkwood and haven't got to this and want something kind of fresh in ghosts and hauntings, then this is for you. I had a good time with this. I liked this book a lot, and I wish I would have read it earlier. I wish I would have got that beautiful hardcover, but this is a signed copy, so I was really happy to have met the author. I've heard her speak on panels at a couple conventions. Just a wonderful person, really good writing. So I'm looking forward to reading her cyberpunk, I think it's a novelette, I'm not sure what that's all about, but it's very different from this book from what I understand. I was delighted to find out that this author, Marcus Cleaver, is actually Canadian. I didn't know that going into it. And you know how I love reading Canadian authors, like Ai Jiang is a Canadian author as well. And it's not like I only specifically pick out Canadian authors. I just like them because I'm Canadian, and you know what? It's just nice to stumble upon a book all of a sudden. And this happens more often than you would think. But yeah, I read the sample of We Used to Live Here. So if you have been susceptible to the hype as I was with this particular book, a lot of people enjoying it, a lot of people not getting it, and that's the thing I think I liked the most, is hearing people being like very confounded by this book. I say pick up the sample that is on Amazon. It has my favorite bookmark in it right now. The sample on Amazon also contains this picture, and this picture talks about some of the areas in the house, and this is like the maps and talking about the way they found their way around Horror Store in the Grady Hendrix book, you know, as pathways, and sort of like, it's not as, of course, detailed as the Navidson record, and I don't know if there are sections in here that are that detailed from House of Leaves, but they do have notes about how to get around, like where this closet takes you to, what happens when you open this door at this time, or if you go through this door and then go back through it, what happens. So it's a very strange book already in that way, and I'm glad that the sample of the ebook had this picture, because it intrigued me to no end, to the point that I jumped on the hardcover. The paperback will come out this summer, from what I understand. So what I'm reading, aside from We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver, I am going to be picking 2 books from the Backwards bookshelf for this month, and I'm hoping to do this, you know, as often as possible, at the very least 2 books a month. Maybe if I'm lucky, a book a week. So right now we're already like most of the way through January. I'm going to snag 2 books here right now. Okay, nice. Move Underground by Nick Mamatas. So I'll be reading that. I keep meaning to get to it. Like I said in the little roundup that I did for these books, introducing the Backwards bookshelf and Everything the Darkness Eats, which I am very interested in getting. I love the look of this book, and you know, I don't know. I have high hopes for this. The new book, I don't know. I haven't heard much about it. It looks gorgeous. I like the look of this, but I know that this also has a different cover as well. So yes, have you read Everything the Darkness Eats or Move Underground by Nick Mamatas? This one has had mixed reviews, and the way some people describe it makes me way more interested about it, and then other people describe it and I put it aside, and I don't know, I guess it kind of hit a lot of people different ways. I'm gonna enjoy it. Oh, this has a Brian Evanson plug. That's really cool. I like Brian Evanson. And I've not really heard much about Everything the Darkness Eats. I guess a lot of people read it, but maybe they talked about it on TikTok, and I'm not on TikTok really except to make fun of things, to make fun of TikTok. That's the only thing I do on TikTok. But speaking of TikTok, if you are here from my TikTok, welcome. That's weird because I barely post on there. If you're here because you used to look for book content on TikTok and can't anymore, then welcome. You should have been here all along. BookTube is really truly where it's at. It doesn't feed that serotonin casino brain thing in your head quite the same way, but it does feed your book addiction the same way, I guarantee. Over the past week, I finished reading The Ushers by Edward Lee, which we'll look at in a second. I also had read and wrote the review for Strange Stones by Edward Lee and Mary San Giovanni. That's up on typicalbooks.com, and I'll be doing a 2-for kind of review for that one because that was a patron pick, and a further Tales from the Rising or additional Tales from the Rising or more Tales from the Rising. And the word tales is most important there because it features dogs, and it was a fundraiser for Christopher Triana's dog a few years ago. So it's a very touching idea for an anthology, and the anthology really struck me. I liked it quite a lot, and reading the two together was kind of neat. And I just was musing to myself on how a husband and wife team both releases like novellas or collections at the same time, and it's nice to like do that marketing at the same time because like they're releasing at the same time and then marketing at the same time and then can take a break at the same time. So that probably works out perfectly. But yeah, I'll be reviewing the two of those together because I read them back to back. Those were both review copies, and I also had a review copy of Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chapman, which was really great, and I'm excited to talk about that further. And what else did I read? I think I'm missing something here. Oh, as I said, I did read The Ushers by Edward Lee, which is a pretty big book. It's a big collection of his short stories with really wonderful conversation after each story about when it was written, the motivation for it, and other stories that may tie in or were written in the same cycle. I'm going to talk about these books from what I've read and then on through least disgusting cover art to the most, which I won't be able to show you the last one, of course, because it is an Edward Lee novel, and I just picked up a nice big collection to go along with my already growing Edward Lee collection there and in paperbacks. So yeah, this will tie into the next video where I talk about extreme horror entirely. But yeah, The Ushers. Now you have to forgive me for the shininess of this. I'm reluctant to take this out of its covering since I have read it now. I'm probably never going to read it again, and I want to keep it as good as I can because I read it as carefully as I can because it is just a wonderful numbered edition of this collection from Edward Lee. The Ushers is the author's long-awaited first collection of short fiction and features some of his most disturbing and provocative horror stories, including Goddess of the New Dark Age, a story I did not like, The Seeker, a story that I did like, Mr. Torso, a story that I absolutely love, plus more over-the-top classics, along with 7 brand new stories appearing here for the first time. If you're ready for horror fiction that takes you well past the edge, Edward Lee is happy to be your tour guide. And he is, and he continues to be. Oh my. Having read what I guess would be his most recent thing with Mary San Giovanni in Strange Stones, he hasn't changed a bit. He is your hellish tour guide. So with The Ushers, it's a short story collection, and there were some I really liked, especially his sci-fi story, The Decortication Technician. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a sci-fi story, which I think every single horror author should try and dabble in. I'm afraid to. I may someday because I've had sci-fi stories. Some stories I wrote when I was little were sort of soft sci-fi, and this is fairly hard sci-fi. And it reminds me quite a bit of Prometheus from the Alien franchise. So if you liked that, or what was that, like giant bugs one that was sort of like a comedy, that was funny too. But take that and make it deadly serious and quite gory and kind of weirdly cosmic at the end. Beautiful story. The Almost Never story was good too. The Hole in the Wall was very short, very weird. The Seeker I sort of enjoyed. I had already mentioned The Goddess of the New Dark Age, just wasn't for me, but Grub Girl and the Prison of Dead Women, absolutely loved this introduction to Grub Girl. Really strong story. The Horror of Chambers was some juvenilia by Edward Lee, so that was a real treat to be able to read. The Salt Diviner was great too, and that is sort of like a weird it has an angle of historical horror in a way. It's really cool. Very, very cool story. Kind of sci-fi as well, fantasy. The Man Who Loved Cliches was really fun. And Shithouse, which is a half of the Ushers in a way. So it ends up with Shithouse, Zipe, Mr. Torso, and the Ushers. And those 4 stories are really the strongest. Shithouse and the Ushers are sort of a part 1 and part 2. Extremely dark. And the Ushers itself has so much, it's very autobiographical, and I really, really love that. Mr. Torso is fun too. And Mr. Torso is the sort of thing that I could see being made into some sort of film. It's just extremely gory, very procedural. It has cops in it. He's an ex-cop, so he writes that really well. While not every single story was 100% for me, it is 100% a great place to start with Edward Lee. Now, if you're looking for short stories to get an angle on the way that he writes, this is really perfect because it introduces you to the motivations behind a lot of his stuff, like Torso books and Grub Girl and Header, and just that sort of hillbilly horror kind of way to write and how that actually scares him. And a lot of his procedural stuff, there's a lot more cops and noir going on in this as well, because you might not think of Edward Lee writing noir, but I think that he does that really well as well. So yeah, perfect introduction to Ed Lee. As noted, it's signed and there's wonderful illustrations throughout. It's just a gorgeous book altogether. Before I get into the really stack of collectible cool Edward Lee, I did just pick this up, Portrait of a Young Psychopath as a Young Woman, Edward Lee and Elizabeth Steffen, and this will go along with another book in a way. And I really like the idea of this being written as American Psycho, but with a woman protagonist or antagonist. They're kind of both, aren't they? I've been hearing this stuff about the remake of American Psycho, like you all have. I'm excited. I love the story itself, and seeing an adaptation of that will be not as divisive as The Crow, I don't think. I think that it will go over a lot better. But I often think, what would American Psycho the film be like if that was a woman, if that was Patty Bateman? What would that look like? You know, I want a shot-for-shot, line-for-line remake of that with a woman protagonist who is straight. That would be the other clincher, is putting men in the situation that the women in that film are in. Really interesting. So I don't know what to expect from this. I love Edward Lee. I've heard good things. We'll see what it turns out to be. We'll see. Another shiny cover, because these are incredibly perfectly preserved. I've picked a lot of these up and there is more to come, and hopefully maybe more Edward Lee as well, from a collector named Fred who is parting with his collection, and I'm picking up what I can when I can. And it's really helpful to flesh out my Edward Lee. I had, I think, about 20 Edward Lee books, so now I have, 5 or 6 more. This is Edward Lee's Flesh Gothic. House of Passion, Hildreth House. On a moonlit night in early spring, 27 people entered the mansion's labyrinthian halls to partake in an orgy of diabolical debauchery, the likes of which beggared description. And one by one, 26 of them were butchered in place. The 27th body was never recovered. House of Sin. The screams have faded and the blood has dried, but the spectral house remains, waiting. House of Hell. Welcome to the mansion made in hell. Flesh Gothic, where the temple of evil is your own body. So it's like a turbocharged hell house, I guess. I've heard about it. I've never read it. You know, I don't talk to a lot of people that read extreme horror. I have been only recently kind of dabbling in the subreddit of extreme horror, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next video, where I talk about a brilliant starter pack for extreme horror. But this, I mean, they don't really talk about older extreme horror as often, except for some collectors talk about it a little bit, but book by book, they just really don't. So I've never talked to anyone about like his House Infernal series at all, but this Flesh Gothic, very interested to get to this. It might be a little bit because I've got other reading to do. Like this one that I really want to get to, Dahmer's Not Dead. I'm sorry about the shininess. It's really hard for me to tell what can be seen. Edward Lee and Elizabeth Steffen again, so it ties into the Portrait of the Psychopath as a Young Woman. And of course it's Jeffrey Dahmer. The nightmare is over. Cannibal psychopath Jeffrey Dahmer. At 8:50 a.m. on November 28, 1994, Dahmer is brutally beaten to death by another inmate in the maximum security prison where he's serving 15 consecutive life sentences. And how? One of American history's most macabre serial killers is officially pronounced dead. Dahmer is dead. Or is he? Because 11 days after the maniac's body is buried, 2 Metropolitan police officers answer a routine call to a rundown motel. What they walk into is a chamber of horrors that beggars description. Everything beggars description. Dahmer's MO down to the last detail. At first, the authorities believe they have a copycat murderer on their hands until Jeffrey Dahmer's fingerprints start showing up at new crime scenes, and so do notes that police graphologists positively identify as Dahmer's handwriting. Dahmer is not dead. Homicide cop Helen Cross is certain it's all a hoax until the night her phone rings and Dahmer himself begins to talk. A diabolical conspiracy has faked Dahmer's death and smuggled him out of prison, and now Dahmer's not dead, I guess. It just says ... So, yeah, another 2-author effort, considering Edward Lee. Very interested to read this. I have a pet interest, like many people who are interested in true crime and serial killers specifically. Jeffrey Dahmer is quite interesting, quite terrible too. And speaking of terrible, we've got these 2 books, Brain Cheese Buffet and White Trash Gothic Part 2, that I am very interested in reading. I thought I had White Trash Gothic. I found it hard to get a hold of, and now I recall it's not that I have. I am getting a few more books off of Fred as well that are Deadite Press books, so harder to come by here in Canada. You find them sometimes in used stores, but yeah. White Trash Gothic Part 2, Edward Lee. Very, very excited. And Brain Cheese Buffet, which I cannot show the cover of because it's a little bit rough. Yeah, you've seen Cannibal Holocaust, you've seen Sallow, you've seen Necromantic, you ain't seen shit. Zombie prostitutes, religious rapists, horny werewolves, death by vomit, and sexual fetishes scraped off the sidewalk from sex prisons to mafia torture chambers. Hold on tight because you're about to enter the perverted and twisted mind of Edward Lee. Once you've seen what he has to show you, there's no coming back, and that's very true. We'll see how Brain Cheese Buffet, which a lot of people say is a little much for them, how that racks up to something like Genital Grinder, which I enjoyed very much, or some of the more new popular kind of like daring people to read books like Dead Inside or Playground, which I didn't really like Playground. I loved Dead Inside though, so we'll see. It's one that I've meant to get to for quite some time, and the big head is back in White Trash Gothic 2. So there is some tie-ins between Big Head, which I have there, and White Trash Gothic and Pigs, I believe. So there's a lot of like crossover in his work, and I don't know the full universe there, the Ed Lee universe, sort of like there is the Stephen King multiverse. There is definitely a multiverse burgeoning, and I would rather get into Grub Girl multiverse, really, because I find her fascinating as a character. But yeah, we'll just hide that cover there. 2 wonderful books to go along with the other 3, and rounding out my Edward Lee collection, so I'm very excited about that. If you are interested in extreme horror, the next video I'll talk about that some more, and this year I'll be talking more about it because it is a pet love of mine. My collection has grown and shrank over the years, and it's growing again, and I'm still finding books kind of hidden along my bookshelf that I'm now putting into like an extreme horror section. As you can see, that area there has grown since the last video because I just keep finding the books, and there's some like upstairs on the bookshelves, so I'm hoping to rearrange the shelves today and kind of put them all in one spot that's easier to get at and to showcase. Have you read any of these books? Are you an Ed Lee fan, or are you more a Richard Lehman fan, or do you not like extreme horror whatsoever? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching today, and have an spooky day.